Seated. There's this famous story of Pope Francis when he became the new pope, and his office staff told him it was time to trade in the old Pope-mobile. This is a true story, okay? I know if you say the word Pope-mobile, it sounds like it's fake. True story. And so Pope Francis went on his own into the streets of Rome, taking $800 of his own money, and he bought an old Fiat, and he had it delivered back to the Vatican. And his staff and his chauffeurs were beside themselves. And that afternoon, when they were going to use the car publicly for the first time, Pope Francis and the chauffeur got into another argument because the Pope said, "I want to drive." And the chauffeur was upset. And finally it was resolved they'd agreed to let the Pope drive. And then the Pope told the chauffeur to get in the back. And it became quickly apparent as they left the Vatican walls that Pope Francis had not driven in a long time. And also that he was completely ignorant of Italian traffic laws. And not long after he left the Vatican, you see the blue lights of a police car pulling up on Pope Francis. And so the famous radio call goes like this: "You will not believe who I just stopped." Who is it, the mayor? No, it's bigger than the mayor. Is it an actor? No, it's bigger than an actor. Is it the president? No, I don't know who it is. All I know, the Pope is driving him around. We're astonished by Pope Francis. And people like this because they live by a different set of rules than everyone else seems to live by. A different set of values than the other people in their position. I'm thinking of Jimmy Carter, who still lives in the same small town where he grew up, in the same house he had before he was president, and you could still walk up to the door of that house and knock on it, and maybe you'll get lucky and see it. I'm thinking of Fred Rogers, who gave up fame and wealth and instead advocated for children. I'm thinking of Nelson Mandela, who insisted on nonviolence, refused to be released from prison a few times, and who insisted that those white, sinning, law-breaking captors of his be forgiven and treated differently. Leaders and people who function differently than the prevailing culture fascinate us. And I think that's why so many people are interested in Jesus. He's an example of this kind of person. He functions differently than the people around him. And let's go further and say that Jesus is the reason we seek leaders and people like this. Because if he is the source of life, the Word made flesh, as our faith teaches, then there possibly is something deep inside of us that recognizes him when we see him in others. Even if we have no faith, or maybe we have a different faith, the world still sees something in him, something different than might makes right. And all of that is the reason this parable is so confusing for us. This morning, Jesus is not appealing to these astonishingly virtuous people like the Good Samaritan or someone like that. But Jesus is appealing to common, ordinary, everyday people in everyday, ordinary, questionable practices. And he's saying even these folks have something to teach the Pharisees who are listening to him. So the first thing we need to clear up is that this is a parable. It is not advice for managing your finances. Jesus is not holding this manager up as an example of virtuous living. He is not telling you to cheat your boss. We miss the meaning because we don't realize what the manager is actually doing, we don't realize exactly who he is. So first we need to say he's a servant. He has no rights. He has no justice. At the beginning of the parable, this third unnamed party has accused him of wrongdoing, and it doesn't matter if he's right or wrong. He's going to lose this argument. And so he has to defend himself, and he has to think of a way to do it. Second, we don't realize what he actually did. It's against the Jewish law to charge interest, to make money on a loan. But it was common to get around the law by charging interest in commodities. And so they would collect interest in things like wheat and olive oil or wine. So when the manager is sitting down with the people who owe his master money, notice they're saying things like, "You owe my master 100 jugs of olive oil? Well, quick, sit down and change it to 50. The manager is not cutting the original amount owed. The manager is cutting out the interest. And it's a smart move. It's genius. Because if the master reports his manager to the temple authorities, they'll turn a blind eye to it because even though everyone did it, it's technically against the law, and he's reporting himself for charging interest. And the manager could defend himself simply by saying, "I was trying to keep my master honest." So it's genius. So what's Jesus' point? What does he think we, or the Pharisees, can learn from this guy? Well, I think that this is one of many parables where Jesus uses people in a supposed lower social class to slap the Pharisees across the face with the truth and make them realize they're living wrong. Just like the Good Samaritan. Just like the prodigal son who wasted his living in a Gentile country. This shrewd manager teaches the Pharisees and forces them to listen. Because just like the shrewd manager, the Pharisees have been visited by their master. Jesus has come to town, and he's calling them to account for their management of the metaphorical books of Israel. You see, the Pharisees' job is to dispense God's treasures, grace, mercy, love, and joy, and they are dispensing those treasures with an eyedropper. The people are miserable. And the dishonest manager, unlike the Pharisees, knew that the most important thing was relationship, was people, and having people on your side and supporting you. And the Pharisees were clinging to their invented notions of purity and righteousness, and they would cut anyone off, no matter who they were, how poor they were, how needy they were, if they disagreed with them. And Jesus is teaching us and them, we need to be generous with both. The riches of this world and the riches of God. So the lesson is, we need to open our eyes. We are surrounded by people, and we're overwhelmed with what to do to help. We're hit by wave after wave of need and want. And we are not financially able or physically able or emotionally able to take on and fix every problem, but what we can do is be open and available and listen in the moment. This morning, I think Christ is nudging us to notice the people that are in need around us. And I'm not just talking about poor people, but I'm talking about the lonely, the wealthy, the people who seem to have it all together and everything figured out. Everyone needs community. Everyone needs human contact. Everyone needs someone to listen. And we can all do that. Jesus was good at that. He was surrounded by people, but he paid enough attention that he could see the one person in the crowd who needed him that day, who needed to hear him, who needed a loving hand and voice and eyes. We live on that street. So this week, look for the interruptions in your path. That person who shows up in front of you, unbeknownst to you, and ask yourself, is this the one that I need to pay attention to, that I need to listen to? Churches are really bad at devouring people, about holding up some notion of purity that we think is the most important thing, and then we'll sacrifice the souls of people to maintain it. May we not be guilty of that here. May I not be guilty of that. May God look at us and think these folks can be trusted with the treasures of this world and the treasures of God, because they give them out generously. May we watch for those people whose lives might be changed forever by an $800 car. By those folks who any show of generosity and love might feel like a joyride with the Pope.